Some men snap under the pressure of HOA fines. They fire off angry emails at midnight. They write 1,000-word complaints that go unread and unfiled. Marcus Haley did something worse than all of that. He got quiet, he got patient, and then, over 14 careful months, he got 5,000 acres. What follows is that story, told simply, chapter by chapter, the way Marcus himself might tell it if you caught him on a Sunday morning walking the oak trails on land that now belongs entirely and legally to him. It is a story about one small mailbox, one very large parcel of land, and what happens when a quiet man decides he has been pushed around for the very last time. The notice arrived on a Tuesday, which Marcus always said was the pettiest day of the week. Tuesdays had no ambition. They existed purely to move the week along without attracting attention and, apparently, to deliver violation letters from the Pinecrest Heights Homeowners Association. Marcus Haley was 51 years old, recently divorced, and 6 months settled into his house on Blackwood Lane when the first fine arrived. That one had been about his fence, 1 inch too tall on the eastern side. He paid it and trimmed the fence. Fine number 2 came about a garden hose left coiled on his front step overnight. He paid that one too, puzzled but quiet. By fine number 11, Marcus had noticed a pattern. His neighbor Gerald Finch, HOA board president, self-appointed community watchdog, and a man with too much free time, had his mailbox painted in what anyone with functioning eyes would call antique ivory, the exact same shade as Marcus's mailbox. The exact shade the letter said was a $75 per day violation. Marcus stood in his driveway with the letter in one hand, his phone in the other. He took a photograph of his mailbox. He walked 30 feet and took a photograph of Gerald's. He looked at both for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He did nothing dramatic. He did not call Gerald. He did not email the board. He went inside, made himself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened his laptop. Not to write a complaint, to look at county property records. He had a feeling, a quiet, steady, early morning kind of feeling. The kind that comes not from anger, but from something colder and more useful. Clarity. It took him 47 minutes to find what he was looking for. The Pinecrest Heights development, 312 homes, 2 swimming pools. A clubhouse that smelled like mildew and borrowed authority sat inside a larger parcel of undeveloped land. 5,000 acres of woodland, creek corridor, and old farm meadow. That land had been sitting in a holding company for 22 years, and according to the county records, it was about to go to auction. Marcus closed the laptop. He drove to the hardware store and bought a can of colonial white paint. He repainted the mailbox that afternoon, every stroke slow and deliberate. He paid the fine by check the same evening. He wrote "paid in full" in the memo line and meant it in more ways than Gerald would ever know. He was playing a longer game now. 14 months is a long time to hold a secret. It requires a particular kind of discipline, the discipline of a man who has learned, through trial and error and one failed marriage, that the people who act first rarely win. Marcus called it the long pause. He had a gift for it. During those 14 months, he liquidated his investment portfolio piece by piece. He took a second mortgage on the Blackwood Lane house. He called his brother in Sacramento, his cousin in Denver, his old college roommate who'd done well in commercial real estate. He explained the situation to each of them calmly and completely. Most of them thought he had lost his mind. A few of them lent him money anyway. His financial advisor, a careful man named Doan who wore the same brand of khakis every day, asked Marcus to sign a document acknowledging that this investment was higher risk, illiquid, and potentially catastrophic to his retirement plan. Marcus signed it without reading the second page. He also hired an attorney. Her name was Celeste Okafor, and she specialized in property law and easement disputes. is a niche that sounds boring until you realize how much power it actually contains. She was sharp, dry, and gave advice the way a surgeon gives a diagnosis, directly, without softening. Celeste reviewed the parcel. She reviewed the development's original deeds. She reviewed the easement documents that had been filed when Pinecrest Heights was built in 1998. Then she looked at Marcus across her desk and said, "You understand what you're actually buying here." It was not a question. He nodded. The auction was held on a gray February morning at the county courthouse, a building that smelled of carpet cleaner and old paper and the particular exhaustion of public institutions. Marcus arrived 40 minutes early. He sat in the back row with a thermos of coffee and a cashier's check that represented, in one rectangular slip of paper, everything he had. There were two other bidders, a timber company representative in a fleece vest who dropped out at $1.2 million with the shrug of someone who had other options, a developer in a good suit who pushed to $1.85 million and then went very still. With people go still when they've reached the edge of what they're allowed to spend, Marcus bid $1.86 million. The room was quiet. The auctioneer looked around twice. The gavel fell. He sat there for a moment after it was over, the cashier's check no longer in his pocket, the deed now beginning its slow process toward his name. He finished his coffee. The thermos had a small dent on the side from where he'd dropped it too. Years ago. He noticed it now, the way you notice small things when large things have just happened. He drove home on roads that crossed his property. He passed through the Pinecrest Heights entrance on an easement that the previous landowner had granted, the original developer, an easement whose exact language Marcus had memorized 3 weeks prior. There was another HOA notice in his mailbox. This one was about his hedges. Marcus read it standing in the driveway. Then he folded it in half, tucked it in his back pocket, and went inside to call Celeste. "We're ready," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Not yet," she said. "2 more fines. Let it feel normal to them." He exhaled slowly. "All right." He was very good at the long pause. They fined him for the hedges, $150, with a photograph attached of the hedge in question, which was, by Marcus's measurement, 2.5 inches above the approved height. He paid it. 3 weeks later, they fined him for a basketball hoop in the driveway. It was not his basketball hoop. It belonged to the Whitmore family 2 doors down and had been left in front of Marcus's house by their 11-year-old son for approximately 4 hours on a Saturday afternoon. Marcus did not contest this. He paid the fine, $60, and said nothing. The board was confident now. Gerald Finch had, by all accounts, been having a very good autumn. That changed on a Thursday. Thursday, Marcus had always maintained, was a day with genuine character. Something actually happened on Thursdays. History agreed with him. On that Thursday morning, every homeowner in Pinecrest Heights, all 312 of them, from the Lings on Maple Court to the retired schoolteacher on the corner of Birch and Summit, received a certified letter. The return address was the law office of Okafor and Associates. The subject line in plain block letters read, "Notice of Land Ownership and Easement Review." The letter was 3 pages long. It was not dramatic. Good legal writing never is. It stated clearly and without flourish that one Marcus J. Howell had acquired title to the 5,240-acre parcel surrounding Pinecrest Heights. It listed the specific rights-of-way that crossed this parcel, the primary community entrance on Ridgeline Drive, the secondary maintenance road along the eastern boundary, the stormwater drainage easement that ran behind the clubhouse, and the utility corridors for water and power serving all 312 homes. It then noted, in language that was careful without being unkind, that the easement agreements for these rights of way had been granted to the original development company, a company that had dissolved in 2008. The question of whether those easements had been properly transferred or renewed was, the letter suggested gently, worth examining. It closed by inviting the HOA board to schedule a meeting at their earliest convenience to discuss the matter. Gerald Finch received his letter at 10:47 in the morning, according to the mail carrier's records. He called Marcus's cell phone at 11:04. Marcus was in the backyard planting a fig tree. He watched the phone buzz twice on the patio table, then go still. He kept planting. He would return the call through Celeste's office on Monday morning. That was the plan. In the meantime, he had a tree to get in the ground before the frost. He worked until the light got low. Then he washed his hands, went inside, and slept better than he had in 3 years. The HOA board requested a meeting for the following Saturday. Celeste countered with Monday evening, and they accepted immediately, which told Marcus everything he needed to know about the state of their nerves. The clubhouse had been tidied for the occasion. The folding chairs were arranged in 2 rows facing a long table. Someone had placed a cheese plate in the center, a gesture that Marcus found quietly touching, the way people reach for hospitality when they don't know what else to reach for. Gerald Finch sat at the head of the table. He had the look of a man who had spent 30 years accumulating small authority and was now sitting very still, hoping no one noticed how thin the foundation was. 2 other board members flanked him, a woman named Diane who kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, and a man named Chuck who had, by all appearances, been told what was happening about 20 minutes ago. They had also brought an attorney, a young man named Preston who wore a good tie and kept clicking the top of his pen, a habit he was clearly unaware of. Marcus sat on the opposite side of the table with Celeste beside him and a manila folder in front of him that he did not open. Gerald opened the meeting. He had prepared remarks. They were about community spirit, shared investment, and the importance of working together. He delivered them in the voice of a man who had given many speeches in this room and was accustomed to being listened to. When he finished, the room was quiet. "Mr. Hawley," Gerald said, "I think there may be some misunderstanding here." "There isn't," Marcus said, pleasantly, without heat. Celeste took over from there. She walked through the easement history with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times in rooms very much like this one. The original developer had filed 5 easement agreements in 1998. Those agreements named the developer by its corporate name. The developer had dissolved in 2008 without formally transferring or renewing the easements. The HOA had continued using the land under those agreements for 17 years without anyone, including several previous owners, of the surrounding parcel, raising the issue. Preston clicked his pen. "There's an argument for implied easement," he said. "There is," Celeste agreed, "and there's a counter-argument. We could spend 18 months in court establishing which one applies, or we could have a conversation tonight." The cheese plate remained untouched throughout. Gerald looked at Marcus. Something in his expression had shifted. The practiced authority was gone, and underneath it was something raw. Not quite anger. Something older than anger. "What do you want?" he asked. Marcus opened the manila folder for the first time. He slid a 4-page document across the table. "A few things," he said. He was not vindictive. That surprised people when the story got out, as stories in small neighborhoods always do. They had expected him to demand outrageous easement fees, or to revoke access entirely, or to stand at the entrance with a gate and a clipboard and the satisfaction of a man settling a score. That was the version people told each other over fences and at school pickup. The actual document was quieter than that. The first 3 pages were standard property law, clean, fair easement language that granted Pinecrest Heights permanent access rights for the entrance road. the maintenance corridor, the drainage easement, and all utility lines. Marcus had never intended to threaten any of those things. The roads, the power, the water, none of that was the point. The community's basic infrastructure was secured without condition. The fourth page was different. Item 1 required the HOA to reform its fine process. No fine could be issued without photographic documentation of the alleged violation, written notice with a minimum 30-day window to respond, and the right to request a hearing before the full board. The board could no longer have one person or one president make and enforce decisions alone. Item 2 required that board elections be held by open community votes, with written notice mailed to every homeowner at least 3 weeks in advance. The previous system, in which board members effectively selected their own successors by circulating paper ballots among themselves, would end. Item 3 required that all fines issued to properties on Blackwood Lane over the past 4 years be reviewed by an independent 3-person panel, where violations were found to be unsubstantiated or selectively enforced. Fines would be refunded. Item 4 required that Gerald Finch resign from the HOA board within 30 days of signing the agreement. Preston, the attorney, read all 4 pages twice. Then he looked up. Item 4 is personal, he said quietly. Celeste looked at him without blinking. Item 4 is the price of the easement. Gerald read the document once, slowly. Then he set it down and looked at the table for a long time. Diane had stopped folding her hands. Chuck was looking at the window. Outside, someone was walking a dog along the street, completely unaware of what was happening in the clubhouse. "You could have just complained to the county," Gerald said finally. "Filed a discrimination claim. Written to the board." "I know," Marcus said. Gerald looked at him. "Why this?" Marcus thought about it for a moment. About the mailbox photograph in his office. About 14 months of patience. About what it costs to keep your mouth shut for a very long time. "Because complaints get filed and forgotten," he said. "I wanted something permanent." Gerald signed 4 weeks later. His resignation letter to the board was 2 sentences long. He sold his house the following spring and moved to a condo in Scottsdale that had no HOA, no board, no committees, no community standards, and no neighbors who planted fruit trees in provocative locations. The independent panel reviewed 31 fines from Blackwood Lane. 22 were refunded. Marcus was not a developer. He had never wanted to be. The land was not an investment in the way investors mean the word, something to be unlocked, maximized, built upon. He had bought it for one specific purpose, and that purpose was now accomplished. What to do with 5,240 acres was a different question. And he approached it the way he approached most things, slowly, with research, without rushing toward an answer. In the first year, he walked the land. All of it, gradually, in sections. He had good boots and a topographic map and a thermos that went everywhere with him. He learned where the creek ran in spring and where it dried to a trickle in August. He found an old stone wall deep in the oak forest, shoulder-high and beautifully made, left by someone who had farmed here long before the suburb arrived. He sat on that wall once for about an hour and thought about the people who had built it and whether they had imagined anything like Pinecrest Heights appearing on the other side of it. He worked with a land trust, a nonprofit that specializes in permanent land protection, to place a conservation easement on 4,100 acres of the Woodland and Creek corridor. This meant the land could never be subdivided, developed, or commercially logged. It would stay as it was. The tax benefit was significant. Celeste walked him through it and called it a pleasant surprise. The thing itself was more than a tax benefit, but Marcus didn't have a word for it, so he didn't try. The remaining acres he managed carefully. A local farming family, the Garcias, who had been in the county for 3 generations, leased about 600 acres of open meadow for cattle grazing. The lease was fair and long-term, and the Garcias maintained the meadow in a way that kept the grass healthy and the fence lines clean. He cut trails through about 200 acres of the oak forest closest to the development. 4 miles of gently graded path, well marked, with a small wooden bridge over the creek at the 1-mile point that he built himself over 3 weekends, with help from a friend who knew about timber framing. He opened the trails to Pinecrest Heights residents on weekend mornings. Access required a written permission request, a single paragraph, submitted by email, answered within 24 hours. He granted every request. He charged no fee. People asked him why he required the request at all if he was going to say yes to everyone. He thought about it for a second and said, "Because it's my land and they're my guests." Then he smiled a little. And because I learned from the best, by the second year, the Sunday morning trail walkers had become a kind of informal community. People who had never spoken to each other in 3 years of proximity would stop at the wooden bridge and chat for 10 minutes. Dogs became acquainted. Children, who had no idea why their parents smiled a little when they stepped onto the trail, ran ahead into the oaks and didn't care whose land it was. Marcus walked out there on Sunday mornings too, usually early, before most people arrived. He liked the quiet of the forest before the day found its feet. He liked the stone wall, which he had done nothing to and would do nothing to. His fruit trees were doing well. He had 11 along the fence line now. None of them were in violation of anything. 2 years after the meeting in the clubhouse, Marcus received a letter from the Pinecrest Heights HOA. The new board had been elected by full community vote the previous spring. They had retired the old violation stationery. The letter was friendly and brief. The board was undertaking a community entrance renovation, new landscaping, updated signage, better lighting, and since the entrance sat on Marcus's easement land, they wanted to be respectful and include him in the planning. They had 3 design proposals. Would he like to take a look? He reviewed the proposals over a weekend. They were reasonable. The lighting plan was good. The signage was tasteful. The landscaping proposal used ornamental boxwoods, which are fine shrubs, but not native to the region, and in Marcus's experience require more water than people expect. He emailed back with one suggestion: replace the boxwoods with native plantings. He recommended serviceberry, which blooms in early spring and produces fruit that birds like, wild columbine for color, and a row of young dogwood trees along the entrance path, the kind that flower white in April and hold their leaves through November in shades of red and copper. The board voted in favor of his suggestions at their next meeting, unanimously and without extended debate. The planting was done on a bright Wednesday in late October. Marcus walked down to watch for a while. The landscaping crew worked efficiently. The foreman, a broad-shouldered man named Roy, who had been doing this for 30 years and knew his trees, pointed at the young dogwoods in their burlap wrapping and said they'd be something in the spring. "They will," Marcus agreed. He stood there for a bit, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the dogwoods go into the ground. He was thinking about the fig tree in his backyard, which had put on 6 inches since he planted it. He was thinking about the stone wall in the oak forest. He was thinking, in a general and unurgent way, about the nature of patience, about how the things you plant always take longer than you expect, and how that turns out, almost always, to be fine. He walked back up the street. The Opera kids were drawing on the sidewalk with chalk, a house, a sun, an animal of uncertain species. Past the Whitmore families. Trampoline, which had been approved by the reformed board process in under a week. Past his neighbors on Blackwood Lane, who waved from their driveways. He went inside. He made coffee. On the wall of his study, in a $4 garage sale frame, was a photograph, 2 mailboxes, same street, same afternoon light, same color, to any reasonable eye. Below the photograph, taped to the bottom of the frame in small neat letters, "Pay the fine. Buy the land."